Rez Abbasi, how are you doing?
Good, Sean. Thank you, Dr. Thunder. Doing well, man. Yeah, it's good to see you after what, like we were talking about a minute ago. We forgot how many years it's been because of the
Yeah,
pandemic, but at least three and a half, I would say, maybe four.
yeah. It's got to be something like that. Uh,
But it feels like it's just around the corner. That's what's weird about it. I feel like
yeah,
we just met.
yeah, we met uh, because we were both sort of clinicians for Christian House's Creative Strings camp.
Exactly. Yeah.
And talk about a. I interviewed him also on this series. Talk
Yeah.
about a hustle machine.
Oh man, he's he's always been that way. But it's if it comes naturally, I say go for it. And it's
Yeah, yeah.
for some of us it doesn't come quite as naturally, so it's more we see it in sort of through a different frame. And but for him it's like it seems so natural. But I think he's also he's working hard. He's definitely a hard worker, and that comes with the territory, the hustle, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, he's really created something out of nothing, and
Yeah, impressive.
a lot of kudos to him. Something else that's great about Christian is he wants to collaborate with great musicians, because sometimes what happens is guys will be hustle machines, and maybe they're great musicians themselves, but it's not really a priority for them to bring in like top level artists and musicians. But that's not the case with Chris. He's got like the baddest cats all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did something with him years ago, and right before me, Osby was there. Greg Osby. He was doing
Yeah.
something that like a month before that. And I was like, wow, man, that's I love Greg's playing, so it was beautiful to hear that.
Yeah. Well, you're a tremendous player yourself,
Oh, thank you.
and I dig your playing. I really enjoyed working with you, and I knew like right after the camp, I knew I had to try to find a way to get you to Ohio State, and I haven't been unsuccessful in that effort yet,
It's okay.
but that definitely is coming. That is
Oh, that'd be
pending.
great. I love the marching band. you know,
Right.
my friend sent me a YouTube link of them playing all of Rush's music, and I just couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my God, a marching band playing Rush, like the whole gamut of music of Rush for like 25 minutes. I was like, oh my God. So I'm also a big fan of Ohio State prior to hearing that on YouTube, but
Oh, right. Yeah, I mean, I'm the director of jazz studies, and
no, that's
I've got this jazz camp shirt, and of course we haven't done the camp for a couple years, pandemic related and whatnot,
of course.
but we're looking to get back to that. Um, yeah, I mean, one of the beautiful things about the Ohio State Jazz Studies program is that we have we have a super strong faculty,
Oh, that's great.
and it's a diverse faculty.
That's even greater.
Yeah, I'll tell you one indictment that I think sticks against a lot of these jazz studies programs around the country is that they don't really look like the musicians that they're studying. They're not like a page out of the tradition with respect to the look of the faculty. And and I'm not necessarily um I'm not trying to start a battle or anything about this, but
I'm sure it's been
it
started
is.
already.
Yeah, right. But it's just it's unfortunate that it is that way. Um, um, you know, I'm disappointed that that obvious flaw isn't something that folks uh, haven't already become more assertive about trying to address. It does seem like, at least temporarily, maybe there's some more sensitivity to that sort of thing now. But hey,
Definitely. Oh yeah.
we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh no,
Go
it's interesting you say that, because the diversity, the idea of diversity in jazz is really important. But in the history, there wasn't that much diversity in jazz. I mean, how many Pakistani-born musicians
Oh, right.
were there in jazz? So it's another level even for me to I just I just joined the faculty at the New School, and I've been doing a lot of teaching there. And it's, you know, if I go into it thinking, sort of looking for diversity, you're kind of right. I don't see it all the time, but then it does stand out when the Reggie Workman walks out of the elevator. I mean, and then I'm there. I'm a Indian Pakistani musician, and then there are a bunch of Asian students that are there this year, and so it's there, but it's sort of in the crevices, you know. And I think you have a point, but I think your other point, which is it is getting better, I think that's true also.
Yeah, and you understand that diversity, that's sort of a friendly way to say what I really want to say, which is, where are the people of color? That's really what I want to say.
Yeah.
Because other aspects of this diversity business aren't really about people of color per se, and often it seems the case is that some of those other agendas seem to have more wind in their sails, and folks seem to be more assertive and aggressive about championing those causes while leaving really, really obvious issues, unaddressed.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I understand it's the people of color that really need to be front and forward in this situation, and diversity naturally will follow to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, see, the thing is that if you want academia to be, if you want a certain population to be increased organically, the way you do that is you make the faculty reflect whatever your deficit is. You be targeted about it. Say, well, we don't have enough black males, for instance, in our student body. Okay, well then let's be more assertive about making sure that we're prioritizing black men with respect to hiring practices. I mean,
right.
It's actually a pretty simple solution. It's just that all of this other stuff seems to get in the way and clog the pipes.
Right. But I would even take it up a notch and say black women, not to downgrade the black men, of course, that too, but black women in general, I think really need to be framed better in these colleges and universities as teachers.
Yeah, it's interesting, because actually in academia, if you look at the black community, if you look black folks, there are 20,000 fewer black men in the academy than black females. And so the usual issue, the usual problem, is actually flipped.
Wow.
I interviewed the president of Ohio State, Dr. Christina Johnson. It was a really great conversation, and in that conversation, she mentioned that when she was growing up, and then when she went to college, she didn't actually think that it was something that a woman could do, that is, to be a professor, because she didn't see any female professors, at least not in the areas that she studied, and she's STEM. And so we got to talk.
Thank you so much for watching my video so far. If you'd like to support,
There are several ways to do so below. Also, likes are free. Please comment, share, and subscribe. Now back to the video. And so we got to talking about that, and I mentioned to her that's an interesting thing because actually in our community, black community, is actually the flipped problem. So it's possible for black boys that go to school to say, hey, I don't see anybody that looks like me teaching any of this. I mean, and imagine, going to a college or university that doesn't have a faculty that is as diverse, say, as it is at Ohio State in jazz in particular. Yeah, and they're like, hey, I want to, maybe I want to teach. I'll say, well, wait a minute, I don't really see anybody. I don't see anybody that looks like me. Whereas where are they at?
Well, the head of the department does.
Yeah. So
That's
anyhow,
not bad. It's like you're like the quarterback.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's a can of worms that can go on forever. We can talk about that. It's a deep situation though. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So anyhow, so talk to us about how you grew up and how music became such a central part of your life.
Well, I mean, not to get boring because it's a little cliched. I think it's with any of us who are professionals. We had a calling for it at a young age too. It's not usually not older. It's usually when you're pretty young. In my case, I was about 11, and it wasn't jazz that started me on that road. It was, I would say, rock and roll. I grew up in California. I was 4 years old when I came from Pakistan. So I'm very much American, very much Californian and New York, for the last many years. But it was definitely the pop music on the radio, because back then the radio was a big thing, right? I mean that's your sort of tentacle to art and culture, and along with the television. Now, most kids don't even listen to the radio, right? So they are proactive about what they want rather than being fed something in more of a surprising manner, and which will eventually influence you. I guess there are playlists and all that stuff, so maybe I'm wrong about that, but back then, hearing all that music and going to a couple concerts got me really started on the guitar track. But when I was about 15, 15 or 16, I discovered jazz and had a couple of teachers who were influential at that time, and really a good friend of mine that was really influential, who was also playing rock and roll. But in order to get to college, he was like, well, I'm starting jazz and classical music. Not that was a big thing. I was like, wait a minute, that's right. I'm 16 years old. I'm going to college next year. Like, what am I going to be, a lawyer or business person or whatever? And I was like, no, I'm really down with this music. And so I started listening to Charlie Parker. He introduced me to Charlie Parker and a number of people. And then the sort of the LA funk scene, which was kind of cool. Larry Carlton and, Robin Ford and all these people, Yellow Jackets, all that stuff. And so I sort of just hit it hard right at 16, all kinds of music. I was diverse right from the start. I wasn't like a pure bebop guitar player right from the start. I was sort of an all-encompassing jazz player. Although one thing I did miss out was the 70s fusion music. It's really weird how I only discovered that later on in life. I knew it was all there, and I even went to a Return to Forever concert, and I knew it was all there, but for some reason it didn't hit me the same as bebop and traditional jazz, let's say, and then jumping to bands like LA Express and Robin Ford and these kind of people, So and then blues, of course, B.B. King. That led me to B.B. King. So that all happened in like a nugget of time when I was 16 or so, And that's when I started shedding, like seriously shedding, like, 6 to 8 hours a day. Quit my rock bands. My girlfriend looked at me weird, all that stuff. So, you know,
How long did the girlfriend stick around after you made that transition?
um, she did break up with me, actually, now that you mention it. Uh, Probably not for those reasons, but I was moving towards the nerdy path, if you will. I thought it was the hip path, and I still do, obviously, but from from the eyes of a 16-year-old female in high school that was hanging out with this rock guitar player who was playing in rock bands and parties and all this stuff, to a guy who just stopped all that and sat home and practiced and started playing piano too and all this stuff. She was just like, wow, what happened, man? This guy ended up not being like this. How we're young back then. Everybody
Okay.
wants the hip person around, so yeah, she broke my heart. but after I got over that, I was back into the shed.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually, in my like relationship history, it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I actually ever was the person that actually broke up with the other person. Every
Wow,
single
that's deep.
relationship, all the way up until like early 30s, early to mid 30s, um, they all split, and
Wow.
and part of it was that I don't know. Uh, I'm like a commitment person,
Yeah, well,
and so if if I'm say I'm going to do something, that I want to follow through, and even if stuff is going on that's not really ideal, I still feel like I'm supposed to stick around for it. Um, and but eventually, I finally figured out that okay, it's okay to be that kind of person, but you really can't be that way with everybody, because it just you end up you know putting yourself out, and actually what happens is you end up actually making it hard for other people too, because as you become damaged, then you cause damage to other folks,
right,
and
right,
all
right.
that. So I was like, okay, let
Very sticky
me chill
subject.
out on that.
Yeah. No, sure.
Fortunately, I uh, found the right one. Been married for 13 years.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
Well,
but
congratulations.
it
Go
but
ahead.
I had to kiss a lot of frogs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I hear you, man. I think, yeah, I just celebrated my 17th anniversary last weekend. So,
God bless you, man.
yeah, so it's, you look, 2020, right? You look at like all what you went been through to get here, and it's like, well, okay, wow, maybe there was a purpose for all that, because, you know, this person broke
Yeah,
my
well, I
heart,
mean,
whatever.
when you go through funky stuff, it makes it easier to appreciate when stuff is actually going really well. So you can at least be grateful in that. So
Yeah, yeah, and it must have etched into my music somehow. Just the you feel all the human qualities.
mm.
When you're in relationships and love and all that, and then it comes out in your music.
Well, yeah, I mean the music is bad. I think one of the okay, so these days, and a lot of it is because the pedagogy has gotten so good that you have all of these like virtuoso kids, you know prodigies, I mean, all over the place.
It's amazing.
And it's more than any time in history. It's totally incredible. And that's great. However, the advantage that someone that has lived always has over someone that is young, that hasn't experienced anything yet, is they actually have something to convey. They actually have a message, a story to tell, because of the experiences that they've had. And that's what art is. Beautiful art, the best kind of art, that's what it does. It's like expressing that that human emotion, that love and
Yeah,
loss,
yeah.
in all of the stuff that we go through.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because the society is so captivated by youth to a detriment, I think, it's sort of like, wow, look at that guy. He can play at 21-year-old, that girl, he or she can play at 21 years old like that. Amazing. I mean, I have a friend that sends me videos of people like that. And I just said, look, I don't really care, not to be harsh, but like, it doesn't matter if you're playing great to me. It matters what's behind the notes. I mean, and I don't necessarily mean like, oh, you have to go through heartbreak and all kinds of, turmoil to be able to play well. I definitely don't mean that. I just mean there's got to be a story that's not even personal. There's got to be a story to the music, like layered behind the notes that I can hear. And it does come out in a certain vocabulary too. I mean, if someone's playing great bebop lines all day and they're playing licks, that might actually cover up the story that's behind the notes, because so it's, my favorite musicians are the ones who have it all kind of, and I hate to judge anybody who doesn't, but because we're all striving, but the kind of musician who has a story, yet they have a vocabulary to sort of back up that story, and that means not a cliched vocabulary. That means that they've really dug deep into themselves, and what they practice is themselves, not something outside of themselves. And it can get very, very strange, this layered kind of thinking. But I believe that there are sort of layers to a person, in terms of just personality, where you're playing from, ego versus, digging deep and all that.
Yeah, and see, one of the things is I also don't glorify trauma.
Right.
So you don't have to experience, trauma and have some like unresolved issues in order to create art at a high level. I would actually argue that if you haven't really addressed whatever issues, then that will actually get in the way of you being productive as a musician. It'll get in the way of your creativity because it'll make it very much difficult to stay focused enough to dig deep enough to find that melody or to find that and that whole sort of tormented artist thing and that whole bag that people try to come out of, that whole like eccentric, and all of that stuff that seems to, especially with creativity, we know a lot of folks that were like that, but it's not necessary. It's not necessary.
Right. I mean, it's interesting because, having a clear channel is a clear channel for the creativity to flow out of. When you clog it up with stuff, then generally the people you're talking about have to use alcohol and drugs to clear that channel. And then when they weren't on alcohol and drugs, who knows how they played, and we can see that, from my hero, John Coltrane, when he got off of all that stuff in the 60s, late 50s, 60s, I mean, he just went from here to, for my taste, he went from being unbelievable to being beyond whatever beyond unbelievable is. But like, still to this day, it's like the greatest stuff for me, listening back to that, it's like, oh, I still shake my head after so many years. It could be lifetimes. I'll still be shaking my head, And
yeah, that's my cat too. Probably my three biggest influences: Sonny Stitt, Coltrane, and Paquito de Rivera.
Wow, that came out of nowhere for me. I wouldn't have expected. I don't know you're playing that well, but I've been checking out your Facebook, posts and stuff, and of course we played, and you remember when I heard you, I mentioned Gary Thomas, right?
Yeah, and that's interesting. I just interviewed Gary.
Oh man, how was that? That's
Oh, it
one
was
I didn't
killing.
jump
He's
on.
man. Do you realize that this dude? You want to talk about a disciplined dude? This guy is unbelievably disciplined. First of all, the dude gets up at like 4:30 or something like every day, right?
That's
And
already
he's always been like that. He's always gotten up hours before the other people in his house, and just to do whatever, to get things started. He has this regimented practice routine, but I was talking to him about fitness, and this dude has been in the gym 5 to 6 days a week since the early 80s without missing a single week.
even on the road.
Even on the road. We talked about what he was doing. Like, he'd have like protein powder, and like when he'd be on tour and stuff, he had protein powder, and he'd have X, Y, and Z, and he was always looking for the gym as soon as he got to wherever he was going.
That's just
It's
crazy.
incredible. It's
That's really
totally
something.
incredible.
Yeah,
And I don't know that you have to be, the bionic man like Gary, but having like a routine and discipline, and obviously not abusing substances that are going to get in the way of your ability to be consistent. It's only going to end up being positive for your process.
yeah. I mean, his physique aside, I mean, like that's just his personal. I mean, Coltrane didn't have that physique, so it's not
Right,
like
right.
everybody has. That's his sort of his calling for on that side, but his playing, I mean, that's I his discipline towards his playing has always been. I mean, his playing has always been remarkable to me. So I don't know how he got there, but now that you're telling me that he's that disciplined, I can kind of gauge kind of how he got there. I mean, we all know how much work this takes, right? I mean, there's no doubt
Right.
about it. But to play, to break the bounds and to play like he did in the late '80s, whatever it was, I think the late '80s. Yeah, it was, and that's just, and to still, for me today, to still be the cat, really. I mean, I love other people too. Joe Lovano was a big, I love him. And I could go on, but I mean, Gary to me is like also like, the very, very top. And to think that I love Bunky Green. That's another guy I think is just
Yeah.
totally under the rug, and it's like it shouldn't be. It doesn't really matter. It shouldn't matter, but it's some reason for me it does matter. Like, I mean, he should be on the cover of all the magazines, just like as a
Yeah.
guru, and
Yeah.
no one seems to give that that respect. I mean,
Okay, so
nobody in the media, that is.
I've got two things. One is about Gary, and then
Yeah.
the other one is about Bunky Green.
Oh, good.
So Gary, he started a program at Peabody,
Oh yeah, I know.
and so he was the director of that program for 20 years, and during the time he was there, he learned how to play bass.
Right, I know. And he started playing bass at gigs.
Right,
The
he's like taking
saxophone.
gigs.
I
Right.
mean, which is like, okay. Well, then it makes sense. You say he's still that disciplined. I mean, that's what it takes.
Yep. Yeah, and I was asking him about his bass playing, and he, in the interview, you could see the acoustic bass leaning up against the wall behind him. He said he doesn't play gigs and stuff on it anymore because
Oh,
he said it was doing something with his left hand, and that was affecting his flute playing.
interesting.
And then we got into talking a little bit about like some of my own issues with my left arm. But so that was interesting. But that's a kind of a fun fact about Gary Thomas. I mean, he learned how to play bass because there was a shortage of bass players, basically, in his program. And then what happened was, then there became enough bass players and then instructors, so then he could let it go, and that's eventually what happened.
Wow, it sounds like only a Gary Thomas story.
In my Bunky Green story. So, and this is great because I don't think I don't think that I have said this story on one of these interviews yet, or maybe one time. I don't remember exactly. I don't think so though. So Bunky, he told me this story. So I had a what is it? That recording Bunky meets Sonny Stitt or Sonny Stitt meets Bunky Green. It's that record, and I was asking him about it, and he started telling me this story about it. He was like, yeah, he's like a young kid and he's getting this opportunity to play with Sonny Stitt, like, one of the legends and everything. And
I might have heard a couple cuts of that.
Yeah, so he shows up to the and I've burned that recording up, man. I've listened to it so many times. But he says he shows up to the studio. Sonny Stitt is already there, and he's warming up, and and it's Sonny Stitt, right? So he's playing like all this incredible stuff, right? So then Bunky, he kind of goes over. He's trying to get his attention. Hey, how are you doing? So then he looks over his shoulder, sees Bunky, and then starts playing even more incredible stuff, right? And he does this like does this like a few times, right? So like he keeps ramping it up, because he's trying to kind of intimidate the cat, right? So and then they did the session and everything. I played with somebody else that played with Sonny Stitt, and Eddie Russ, rest in peace, who was sort of a musical mentor of mine, and he was one of the only guys that ever really toured with Stitt, because Stitt, he would just go to whatever city, find whoever the cats were, and then cut a record that with standards basically. And if you look at folks' discographies, nobody is even close of records in their own name than Sonny Stitt. Sonny Stitt crushes everybody.
I had no idea.
He crushes everybody by a lot. I'm talking about of recordings with his name on the recording, like where he's the artist.
Yeah, not a side.
Not a side guy. So anyhow, Eddie Russ actually toured with Sonny Stitt for a couple years, which was like unheard of. So anyhow, Eddie was in my band when I was a kid, and I would ask him, about Stitt and stuff, because Stitt's my hero, and so I would ask him about different things, and he would tell me stuff like, there's certain mannerisms that I had, like when I was playing, that at times reminded me of Stitt, like some of the signals I was trying to give him as far as ending a tune or something like that. And another thing he told me, and he was reluctant to share this, but I think he was telling me this because he didn't want me to emulate certain aspects of Stitt. He said that in order for Stitt to get up and get going, he had to drink like a glass this tall of gin.
Damn.
Like in the morning, just to get going.
That was his coffee.
And yeah, right. And Stitt with the and this is quite incredible too. Like the fact that Stitt, you see all these pictures where Stitt's got a cigarette between his fingers, and he's playing, right? And he's playing all this like incredible stuff, and he's got like a cigarette between his fingers.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Dude, this dude was really an incredible player. Obviously, probably starting with a big glass of gin in the morning is probably not what you want to do if you want to live for very long.
That's clearing the vessel, all right.
Yeah, that's right.
You know what I mean?
It's like, woo, I'm awake now. Let's go.
Yeah. That's.
Oh my goodness. But anyhow, So we kind of were we were talking about 16-year-old Rez Abbasi. Why don't you continue on from there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I continued to play, and then I got into USC, Southern California, eventually in the jazz program, the guitar program, and then I got tired of Los Angeles, although it's dear to me still, but I got tired of the scene, or the lack of scene. I felt like everything's based on college, and you have to have a car to drive everywhere. It's not that conducive to just bumping into people and saying, hey, let's play a session. So, but at the time I was studying with, it's interesting because at the time I was studying with two people, Joe DiOrio, who's a great guitar player. He still lives in Connecticut. And I was studying, believe it or not, bar talk with Terry Plameri, who's a upright bass player. I think he's in Miami, and that was a great eye-opening experience. And Terry had connections from New York as well as Joe. They both were connected to New York, and somehow both of them at different times said I should move to New York. They both kind of said, you got this New York sound, whatever that means. I don't know what they meant by that. Well, I kind of do, but they were saying, you have this sound, man, you should really consider moving to New York. And I was like, wow. So I ended up doing that because I was also kind of like, at the same time, it happened to be that I was just getting burnt out, and they said it at the right time. So I took off semesters, thought about it, and ended up moving to New York after another girl broke my heart. that too, but go back full circle. But of course, she broke my heart because I told her I'm moving. So that all makes sense. At the time, I was naive. Hey, you can come to visit me, but it's the best thing that could have happened, obviously. And so I went to New York, and then things opened up. I started playing a lot more. Studied a little bit with John Abercrombie. One of my to-be heroes. That kind of thing. Studied with a few other teachers that Jack Wilkins was one of my teachers, Rodney Jones, very different styles than I was sort of involved with, but nevertheless amazing.
Yeah, so you were talking about like they said that you have a New York sound. That's interesting. I think about West Coast versus East Coast as far as jazz, and the West Coast thing is much more. It seems to emulate the sort of the landscape, right? So
it seems like that.
Yeah, so the West Coast, it's there's less let's see here. There's less sort of aggression, purposeful, hey, I'm walking here because I'm going somewhere. That's like the New York thing. It's like this assertiveness. Everybody's kind of got a little bit of an edge, whereas the West Coast, it's you have to have a car to go everywhere. It takes a long time to get anywhere. There's more grass, there's more scenery, all of that kind of thing.
It's easier to take more breaks. You're in the sun. Oh man,
Yeah.
That kind of thing. It was all there. Yeah, totally.
And all of my the players that I dig the most, they're all East Coast guys. I mean, it's just that's just facts. That's just what it is. Because there's that.
The edge.
And I'm not, I don't mean to be. I'm gonna say something, and this is not to say that I don't respect the contribution, and it's not to say that I don't respect the the just virtuoso caliber playing of this person. But Stan Getz, early Stan Getz I can get with because he's still playing a lot of bop, but late Stan Getz is difficult for me to listen to because he is not as it at times it comes off to me as being a little almost lackadaisical in not willing to press a certain I don't know. It just seems like he's been hanging out in the West Coast.
Yeah, I mean,
and I want to hear that, like, smack me upside the head, huge sound trying to, peel the paint off the ceiling, like just really assertive kind of playing. And part of that has to do with my own personality, but a lot of it just has to do with all the guys that I tend to dig. I mean, you listen to Charlie Parker, and it's of course there. I mean, it's very much assertive. It's like he's got to go somewhere. I'm taking you somewhere all the time. Every time every second of everything I'm playing, I'm going somewhere with this. It just has that kind of thing. And
so I can see your point. Yeah.
Yeah, but nothing against Stan Getz, because somebody's going to watch this and be like, oh, man, he's dogging Stan Getz and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, no, you're just trying to make a point. And you did say the earlier Stan Getz you dug a lot, so that balances it.
Right.
I don't think there are only very few musicians that we like from the very start to the very end. I mean, usually there are a number of them, of course, but usually you like sort of pockets in their playing of this time zone and that time zone. I mean, I mentioned Coltrane. I mean, I much prefer him after 59, although I love Giant Steps, you know what I mean? But still, like once you start opening the door, then it's like, whoa, then it kills me.
Yeah, Coltrane is a great subject for study because he went through so many different sort of transitions. And he did that sort of that ideal approach to developing, that you emulate, you internalize, then you innovate,
right?
That whole thing.
Yeah. He was very into tradition. Yeah,
absolutely. So like when he was playing alto, he sounds like Parker, right? So then he switches to tenor, he sounds like Dexter. Like more like Dexter than Dexter. And we know he's very influenced by Dexter because Dexter was the first tenor player that had that kind of edge in his sound. All of the tenor players prior to Dexter had that kind of fluffy voo kind of thing.
Coleman
Nothing
Hawkins,
against voo.
Coleman Hawkins, Lester. Yeah. I mean, it was a different kind of.
That's right. It. So then this, it's like he flips a switch, and then most of the players they emulate that more edgy sound. And of course, Coltrane was one of the first to really emulate that sound. And then, Coltrane goes through a period where he's trying to sound more like Sonny Rollins. He's got that tune like Sonny. So he's talking about Sonny Rollins. He's doing all that kind of single tonguing stuff, like ta 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 ta. He's doing all of this stuff, and there's a certain period where he's doing that. He starts playing with Miles, and he's the whole. But he had already kind of started the sheets of sound thing, but the modal stuff, right?
Right.
So then, and of course that was very much influenced by Miles. Then he goes, and I mean, it's amazing. He spends a lot of time out east. You start to hear him experiment with stuff like false fingering, where he's getting slightly different pitches. It's like he's trying to imply different notes other than the usual 12 notes. Yeah, because of the sort of Eastern religious music he starts checking out, and so you start hearing him incorporate the augmented scale, and giant steps, which is basically taking the augmented scale because the three key centers, and diatonicizing the augmented scale. It's a very clever, it's a very, very clever way to deal with that. To incorporate like a scale that is symmetrical into a diatonic framework. It's really quite ingenious.
And then blowing over all that.
Right.
And, directly.
And this is interesting too. A lot of folks don't or are not aware of this, But actually, Coltrane didn't actually invent the giant step substitution. So Coltrane didn't actually invent Coltrane changes, which is interesting. It's actually Duke Ellington. So Duke Ellington wrote a tune called Blue Rose. If you listen to the progression on Blue Rose, you can clearly hear the giant step sub. But what's ingenious about what Coltrane does with it is it's all of the superimposing that. It's where he utilizes it. So like he takes, confirmation and superimposes the sub over those changes, and that's 26-2. He takes what is this thing called Love, which is Hot House, and he superimposes the sub, and that's Fifth House. He does Satellite is Ornithology,
and Tune Up,
which is How High the Moon, right? So he does all of this really clever, taking that Tune Up, that's Countdown, right? So it's just very clever how he takes all of that stuff and superimposes it, but really he's really trying to hint at this sort of symmetrical, this augmented scale stuff, which nobody is playing that at that point.
Right. No, it's pretty astonishing.
He's such an incredible. Yeah, I did a Love Supreme. So, I played as part. I was the minister of music at a missionary Baptist church, and the pastor there allowed me to, during a Black History Month, to sort of restructure the service. So, at the beginning of the service, we just did. I think we played like a hymn, and then after we did the hymn, we played the entire A Love Supreme suite uninterrupted. And
no easy task.
It was, it was me and I brought in the jazz faculty from Ohio State, and we played that entire thing because that's the natural habitat for that music. If you look at the titles of the songs, one's Psalm, resolution, pursuance, acknowledgement, right? So the names of the movements, they are liturgical in function, even. So I could keep talking about that, but this is not really about about me. It's
it's about Coltrane.
It's about Coltrane. That's right. He's the guy.
Coltrane, man. Yeah. Well.
So what's your favorite Coltrane record?
There are too many of them, but I think Crescent is actually, I like that better than Love Supreme. But that's I say that very mildly, because it's like comparing two kids. It's like I don't really like that better than Love Supreme, but it's the one that when I was really into the Coltrane listening period, I would go there. And then Live at Birdland, I think, was one. Live at the Village Gate, when they was with the quartet and just took it to extremes of what that quartet can do. And then Sunship and some of these other ones, but prior to probably 67 66 is what I liked. In the mid 60s, 65, 4. That's what I like the most.
Yeah, one thing about Train is he's also a good study in developing a band.
Oh yeah.
So my other big influence, Sonny Stitt, is not so much a study in developing a band, because he never really developed a band, right? He just went and played with whoever would play. But Coltrane stayed with the same players for a long period of time, and you see how impactful that was on the product, on the band chemistry, on the sound. And he developed this incredible system of charting songs that he knew could be played by that band. I mean, so he could generate songs pretty quickly because he knew how the band was going to interpret the music, right?
Yeah. I mean, I like, it's an interesting, thought that, having the same band, I have like reservations sometimes about that. It's interesting you mentioned that. In the sense of Miles's bands and Coltrane's bands, I would never argue the fact, that they had the same bands, and that's what escalated, their evolution, etc. But it's like for example, if I did throw a wrench in there and say, how would Coltrane have sounded, with, a different, we've heard him with Roy Haynes, for instance, and he
Right.
I love those. I forgot what record that is, but the one with Roy Haynes, one or two with Roy Haynes, it's a very different thing, and it's still Coltrane's band, but you can hear a different kind of thing happening. It's a different kind of accenting on the drums, obviously, but like, if a dream band for me would be to hear Keith Jarrett with Coltrane. I mean, it would be, to me, would be like, we heard Keith with Charles Lloyd when he was young, when he was 22 or whatever it was, and he was doing all that. I mean, I can just imagine that being, and I love McCoy. McCoy is like, my number one of my top, piano players of all time, of course. But I'm just saying, we have so many records of that sort that I would always wonder how it would sound with someone who's so refreshing with the harmonies and exploratory, just like Coltrane was at the end of his, end of his life, to see how someone like Keith Jarrett would sound, or DeJohnette, something like of this nature. I think did Jack play with Coltrane? He did play with Coltrane, yeah, at one point. I don't know if that's ever. I don't think that was recorded. That would have.
Yeah, you're saying this, and it reminds me of what is it? The Mars Hill or Mars, and so it's the Miles Davis band. It was the one with Coltrane. So, what was it like? A couple of the gigs, Sonny Stitt was subbing for Coltrane.
Oh wow!
And total. I mean it's a totally different. I mean, it's just a total. I mean, it's that one that. I mean, it's a profound difference. So I'm not gonna act like it's like, oh, this just one little difference makes it. No, it's like a huge difference, and of course it made it a huge difference.
Yeah.
So that's always interesting. Like when you find those like those situations where like somebody had to sub last minute or whatever, and just hear how different it is,
Yeah, I think the more creative the band, the more the receptivity is there for a sub, because you don't have to, articulate sort of a similar kind of vibe all the time. And I think there are certain bands that would have been great to have a different lineup once in a while. Personally, I think it would be amazing just to hear historically. Just, it may not have worked out, but just to hear. And it's not really about comparing that new lineup, that sub lineup, to the real deal, but it's just to have, I mean, imagine if we can listen to that right now. That'd be amazing. Another thing I was mentioned to my students, how interesting would it be to hear Coltrane play Giant Steps in 1966? Is there any recording of that?
Yeah.
Or in 65 or 64 or whatever? I mean, in the 60s, when you start getting into the real like sheets of sound, instead of playing directly over the chords, on Giant Steps, which kind of, almost you have to, because, you're outlining the changes, but just to see how he could still play changes in 65. He was still playing, to hear that would have been like, oh man, that would have been another checklist on the history, in history. Just that, hey, here's Culture playing Giant Steps, 65. Wow.
So you said something about receptivity, of a band, and that makes it so that when a sub comes in, it's still like a positive, experience, of course. So that makes me think about this whole communication component inherent in the music, right? And when I say communication, I'm not, there is sort of communication like, how are we going to end the tune? How are we, how many courses is somebody going to play? Are we trading or not? Whatever. There's that kind of thing. What kind of feel do we want this tune to be? There's that kind of communication, but that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking more about the, once you're actually playing, you already know what the tune is. You're in the middle of the tune. This sort of listening and actually saying things that are appropriate. In in context, playing things that are appropriate. Playing things that take into account what was just played or said, and because of the ability to understand and acknowledge what was said, to be able to say something that is reciprocal, that is, responsorial, that is, that takes that, borrows aspects of it to elevate the conversation to the next level, all of that kind of stuff. It seems to me that a lot of that is not as present these days in the music. It seems like everybody's about getting all their stuff out, and then it's like if they really are paying attention to what just happened or not, or if they're really like lining up, if they've already established a certain common sense of time or not, it doesn't matter. I'm here to play the stuff I'm going to play. What do you think of that?
Well, I totally agree with that. And I think part of the problem is, that a lot of band leaders sort of hire the same people. And what that does is that it sort of frames this situation as like hired guns, so to speak. I mean, and that's that's the way you walk into the situation. There's so many albums that people are making with the same people on them. I mean, I would love to hire certain guys that I won't name, but the reason why I won't do it is because I see them on everybody's record. I still love their playing, but then it's going to make my record sound, because jazz, so much of it has to do with improvisation, right? It doesn't matter who's composing. I mean, hopefully the composer and the composition is great. That's a given, let's say, in our situation, that it's a certain level, at least, great, whatever. But if it's a certain level, then really what the next level is who is playing the composition. And in jazz, it's always been, 40-50% of the players in the band that are really giving voice, let's say, to the music. Now, if I hire the top gun, the top drummer that are on so many records, sure, it would be exciting for me, and it might be kind of cool to hear him on my tunes. But what is that really saying in the evolutionary aspect of jazz, if that's the person who's being hired on so many records? And that goes for like trumpet, guitar, piano, bass, drums, all those instruments. If you see the same cats all the time, I don't know if you've noticed that, but it's probably happening a little less now because there are a lot more younger folk in the town. But back in the day, it's sort of like, Sonny Rollins had his band, and Coltrane had his group, Miles had his groups, and those everybody was playing in different groups, but the music was different. It was being created, like it was actually being created for the first time, you know. And now, you know, we do our best to keep up with that, but in reality, we're not. No one's really creating anything brand new. You know, we're adding something to what's been created from. I mean, you can take it all the way back to Louis Armstrong, but you know, you continue with, let's just say we cross the modern jazz line and get into bebop, and then you get into the late 50s 60s stuff, which composers like Monk and whatnot, you know, and all these great composers started writing new music, and then you get into the 70s, and that's kind of where it seems to have redone it. So it seems to have like gone full circle, and now we're trying to add things to all that, whether consciously or not. You know, it's not like I want to just add my little 2% to the 70s or the 60s or the 50s, but regardless of what I want, I think even if my music comes out sounding somewhat fresh, you know, you could always say, oh yeah, you know, remember this record in the 60s? That, you know, that kind of resembles a little bit of what they were doing. I'm glad, you know, you added to that, but but back then it was like brand new. You know, it was like,
right,
wow.
I get it.
You know, so it's a little different now. I mean, I think people are basically, you know, things are starting to sound stagnant a little bit, and it has been for many years now. Of course, you'll get the few people who come out with some really cool stuff, and then it shakes you shake your head, say, wow, that's great, good for them. But this is kind of the the improvisations are starting to sound similar, and therefore the records are starting to sound similar, regardless of the composition.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. You know, one thing that made me think of is, see, part of this is about, it's like a marketing strategy.
Yes.
So basically, okay, I'm doing a record. I need someone on this record that everybody already knows who they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's going to be, you know, Brian Blade or something, whatever. Everybody knows who this cat is. He's killing. He's been on a bunch of records. I know he's going to sound great, whatever. So then you put him on your record. And then so it sort of it by relationship, you know, by collaboration, it tends to elevate the view that people have of everybody that's on that recording, right? So it's like this marketing strategy, which is interesting because the same strategy is used rather effectively by YouTubers.
Oh,
I do the same. I do the same thing, right? So I go and, you know, I'll collaborate with X, Y, and Z. I'll go do something on their platform. I'll bring them onto my platform, you know, and by doing that, you sort of introducing my audience to them, their audience to me.
It's a thing of perception.
And then maybe you can get some more, right? So maybe you can get a few more subscribers, you know. So there's that sort of aspect of it. So I understand it from a business perspective. It makes sense to do that, but I think that your point is well put, that by having the same sort of hired guns on everyone's recordings, nothing against Brian Blade, who's absolutely killing. Yeah. I'm about
Not
to
his
call
fault.
him. Yeah, right. I'm about to call him from one of my records. Right. But nothing. But what ends up happening is, as you said, all the recordings start to have a similar kind of sound, because you have the same sort of players that are getting hired to play on all the recordings. That's a really good point, and I hadn't even thought about that. And it is the case, it seems, that when there was a lot more jazz work, you didn't have as much sort of cross, of the same guys going and playing with everybody because everybody had a gig.
Yeah, and then new person would come in town. Hey man, I need the sub. This my main person couldn't make it. All right, come on. And this guy plays great, and then he gets the gig. And then it's more of a turnaround thing happening. So yeah, it's a touchy subject. I understand both sides of the coin. It's just personally, when I see someone come out with a record with some of these names on them, and there's like 2 or 3 names right back to back. I mean, back in the day, it happened, but now times have changed. I hired Peter Erskine and Mark Johnson for one of my records, years ago when I was really young, because I was listening to them a lot, and I was like, oh man, and I had some connections to them, and I was like, okay, I'd love to have them on a few tracks, and so I did the same thing, of course. So it's not always because of the names; they happen to have the names also, but it was because I was listening to them all the time, and it felt like on Abercrombie's records, and it felt good, and it's like, man, I would love to have this as my band, not my band, but whatever for the record. So I understand that, you have that shell shock of having people that great on, playing with you, and I can totally get that. But when I see, sort of more established cats that, maybe in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and I see the lineups, and the lineups are just, checklist top dogs, I don't even bother listening to those records. I won't even turn those on. I already know what it's going to be. It's like, I don't need to listen to it. There's only so much time in this world. I know that's not to be negative or pessimistic about that, but it's like there's so many records I could be listening to. Why would I listen to some record that this guy just obviously just hired stars on his record, and he's not of that caliber, but still he or she hired these people to do what you just said, which is to make a business mark and to make a mark of perception. I'm done with that stuff. That was me in the 20s.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And yeah, I mean, the one of the things that you just said about, there's a lot of records that exist that we haven't heard yet, right? So maybe spend the time focusing on stuff that actually is different and something else. And we only have a certain amount of time, right? So yeah, okay, so we can go back to that whole thing that everybody says about time. You don't know how it's your most valuable
asset, right?
Asset or whatever. And so it is both finite and volatile at the same time. It's volatile in that you don't actually know how much time you're going to get.
Yeah,
exactly. Right? You might be living right. You might be eating the right foods, going to the gym. You might be Gary Thomas in your regiment. But stuff can happen. I mean, or you could get into some accident or something. So you don't actually know how much time you actually have. So it's both finite and volatile. And so might as well spend the time doing stuff that is more like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, of course, if we see it in that light, that we don't have enough. We don't know when we're leaving this planet or whatever. None of it really matters. Then you might as well listen to that record with all the stars on it if you want. You dig what I'm saying? So it comes around. It's sort of like it's kind of ironic in that sense. It's like, well, what am I progressing towards, really? Like, even if I become the greatest musician I could have ever believed in or thought of, hopefully it's maybe helping the planet at the same time. Does it really matter? I mean, this is something I've been, in my early mid 50s, I've been thinking about more. Of course, as you get older, you start thinking about these kinds of things. although I've been thinking about them for years, decades, unfortunately, because it's a little too much to think about when you're young, I guess. But get a head start. But it's a matter of just what do you want to contribute? Like, if I were to think that if I was thinking nihilistically, then there's no point of playing music at all. So that's probably not the right way to think, in my taste, anyway. So if I am going to play music and if I want to put out some music, for me, in order to prioritize stuff that I'm going to listen to, that's going to help me put out and project more interesting stuff, that's why I don't listen to those records I just mentioned. These throw together outfits. That are just sort of like coming out left and right. I mean, God bless the people who do that. I mean, I know what they're doing, and it's a beautiful thing that they can play with the top dogs and really feel that, and I understand that. But as a listener and a musician on the level that I'm at, I don't feel like I need to really delve into that planet.
Yeah, and this is interesting too, because and it's positive for the folks that are the top dogs, right? Because they're getting a lot of paydays, right? And that sort of one thing that also highlights is that, we do a lot of this sort of, our society does a lot of this in politicians complaining about this, the top 1%. They're filthy rich, everybody else is poor and all like this, right? But jazz has that same thing, right?
Oh yeah,
you got a top
jazz
1%.
is like a third world country. Yeah, I mean, there's the real rich, there's very little medium, and then there's these people who are just struggling all the time.
Right.
There's very little middle ground, I mean, you could, of course, we teach and we do, other things that are beneficial to the society and our bank account, so to speak. And we do other things other than just perform and record too, right? So in the holistic approach, you do get, you do maintain a living and continue playing. So you don't always have to be at the bottom all the time. There are ways to just sort of upgrade yourself a little bit, I assume.
So I want to ask you this question. I mean, you were talking about how you've thought even for decades about some of these more sort of profound questions about like leaving a legacy, and obviously, I mean, if Coltrane is a central figure in your development, then even thinking about his spirituality and how that obviously profoundly impacted his music. What role has spirituality played in your life, in your music, in your development, and even in your view of what's important and what kind of legacy you want to leave?
That's such a huge question, man. I don't even know if it's answerable, quite honestly.
You got 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay, well, I'll just press the button, man.
No, I'm teasing. Now I know it's I know it's a huge question, but yeah.
Well, I mean, spirituality. It's like, I mean, I'm not religious.
Okay.
Religion and spirituality are two different things for me, and most people don't understand that. But I'm more into the contemplative studying and this, the Hindu Buddhist paths, if you will, but not even just necessarily those, because then people think those are religions. I'm not into the religion parts of those. I'm into the spiritual parts. And it's not really a matter of being into it. It's what that teaches, what those teaches me, the meditational aspect and all that. What that's taught me is to try not to solidify an identity. That I'm just spewing out words here, but I'm actually trying, and trying is another thing that's, usually not balanced with the idea of spirituality. You don't really try. I mean, it's a matter of it being natural. But if you will, I will say I've always, many decades, I've tried to disidentify with who I think I am, and it's I'm not saying I'm even close, man. I mean, this has been very difficult, actually, because with jazz, being a musician, you would think that that's a perfect tool to allow that to happen. But what comes with all that, with the tool of playing and improvising, let's say, and letting your soul become lit, let's say, what comes with all that is this ego of how well am I playing? What is this person thinking about me playing? Why did I get a bad review? Why did I get a good review? All the whole business aspect of it, and the whole the whole source of like feeding off of people and what they think about your playing and being hired, all these things. Was that a good solo? You know exactly what I'm talking about. So, I mean, I think everybody does. And so I've been trying to, I don't want to say manufacture, but I've been trying to sort of come up with tools to allow me to let things happen, to sort of suspend judgment, if you will, sometimes in my playing. I actually, I mean, it's kind of a Zen, way of looking at things. I think maybe that's the closest I can put it, but
I think that's
not religious.
Yeah, it's quite profound. What you're saying about this. You said, what did you say? Disidentifying.
Yeah, with my identity.
With your identity, yeah.
With my supposed illusionary identity, which it really has a lot to do with conditioning.
So one thing that makes me think of, the age-old question, or the age-old pursuit of know thyself, right? And
yes.
The problem with that is that it's virtually impossible for you to know yourself, right? Because, and it's one of the reasons why we need other people, right? Because other people can see you from angles that you cannot see yourself from. And it's part of the value of community, is the community can actually tell you about aspects of you that you will never be able to personally perceive. You're locked in here. So everything, I'm locked inside. So no matter how I'm trying to change the vantage point on something, it's still from my own perspective. You can't get away from that. I mean, that's like one of the challenges of being a person, and then even the kind of idea of trying to improve and what that actually means. And I take the point about how your ego can, negative aspects, because 100% of the ego is not bad. It's just the sort of components of ego that, like you said, are so here's an example of something that I know a lot of musicians deal with, and this almost seems like a positive thing. It almost seems like you have such lofty goals or ambitions about your musicianship, and you're pursuing perfection and all this kind of stuff, that it actually is profoundly kind of egocentric, and it's kind of all the negative parts of this ego thing. And that is, when someone has come to one of your gigs to support you, they really dig it, and they thought so much of your performance that they actually come up to you and say something to you. Say, man, that was great. I really appreciated that. Man, that second song, man, I was so killing. I really, really dug your playing. Thank you so much. And there's like this, there is this, this temptation, just to not say thank you and to start saying the things that you thought were bad with the performance.
Oh, right.
Oh man, I wasn't that, it wasn't that great and blah, 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 like this. And the thing is that, you don't own the performance, right? You were a participant in the performance. You were a participant in the experience. And once it hits someone else's ears, it no longer belongs to you. And
Right,
who are you to destroy them by saying all, because it's super condescending. They had an experience and you're trying to take that experience away from them.
Well, it's super condescending to yourself too. It's sort of like it's ego working backwards. It's like, no, you can't enjoy that because you don't really know how great I am. You should see me on a good night.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, that's the same ego I'm talking about. It's like me, you, me, and myself. It's all about or it's not about the universal self. It's more about the individual self. And I'm that's what I was essentially trying to say.
And that makes me think about, okay, so it seems that there's a hyper I almost don't want to use this word because it's overused, and it almost never is actually the case about the people that it gets associated with. But the narcissism, okay,
right.
It's like one of these popular terms. Everybody says this, and you don't know what the heck they're talking about because it's just thrown around. But in this context, maybe it actually plays. There's this like narcissistic, egotistical, hyper self-involved, everything I play, I'm just playing it for myself. I have to enjoy it. It's got to be for me. That whole thing, which is very postmodern, actually, and it's actually a negative aspect of the postmodern thing, is everybody is just trying to go for themselves and their own thing, and what it does is it diminishes the importance and value of community. See, this music that we're talking about, jazz, it has a particular context. It's not just about you. It's about the context. It's about the community, right? And so playing things that are only for you without even considering the connection necessary to make with the audience, the connection to make with the other musicians, the communication component that is so important, not just out here just playing your stuff and then ignoring what else is going on, but actually, stuff like staying in the moment and not like responding to like freaking, messages on your phone, like when you're like playing the gig and somebody else is taking a solo and it's like, hey, let me order some Uber Eats, because I need a cheeseburger,
That would be a first time.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm trying to be, a little silly and hyperbolic with it, but that's kind of the thing, though.
Yeah, no, I can agree with a lot of that. I mean, I would say that's the framework for all music, not just jazz. It's a community. I mean, music is communal, anyways, in general. But yeah, it's a strange line there, because I feel like I agree with you. At the same time, there's a part of me that just because you're playing for yourself doesn't mean you're sort of masturbating on your instrument. Because we tend to connote the idea that if you're playing for yourself, you're kind of just playing all these notes and random stuff. It doesn't have to be like that, right? There's a gray area that you can play for yourself and also pretty much have the audience just reciprocate your feelings. I totally get your point, and I agree with that. We're just adding to it, and another thing is, it's sort of like, here's something I thought about also. I thought about like the idea of playing to an audience or incorporating the audience in your playing. Sometimes it makes me second guess things. Like, do I really know what the audience wants? Do I really know, like, if I'm going to play to the audience to the degree that, I'm trying to ask myself, what do they want? What do they want? What if this part of the audience wants something different than that audience? What if these are tourists that came to hear, straight ahead jazz in New York, which happens all the time, but I'm playing my original stuff. So then it's a conundrum. Then where does that place me? So it really places me right back to myself. Why am I doing this? What's going on? Like, so I guess my paradigm is coming from this place of, I do what I do through the filter of my own music and my own upbringing, my own conditioning, if you will. And whoever the fans are will follow, and so it's a little bit backwards, but it's not completely backwards of what you're saying, but it's a little bit from a different angle.
Yeah. No, I take your point and clarification. So an interesting problem. Again, this idea of knowing yourself, and we are stuck inside ourselves, and so at one level, at least at one level, that means that pleasing yourself in that way is kind of the only thing that you have that you can do. Maybe you need to expand the definition of what it means to be to feel good about yourself, to feel good about your performance or whatever like that. Maybe you can expand what the definition is in order to incorporate some of these other things. That challenge between like serving the audience and quote unquote serving the music, that's like the age old challenge. By the sort of communal and community and audience responding to the audience, being somewhat engaged in what the audience's experience is, I don't mean necessarily to change one's own identity, but rather to understand that it's not just about how good I feel when I play the music. It's got to be something more than that. And it gets real gray. That whole zone is like a huge gray area that's makes it challenging to.
No, absolutely, and it is gray, and we have a tendency. I totally have a tendency to try and, like, just with everything in my life, to try and find the answer, a concrete answer, and then that's it. Which there really isn't. I mean, it depends on who you are, what you want from music. But that example you gave of, after the fact, after the concert, someone saying, "Oh, that second tune was amazing," and you kind of like sit there going, "Yeah, that was okay, man. I can do better." I agree with that 100%. That's that's a different thing altogether. That's like self-deprecating, and it's just not the right way to go. I mean, one of my heroes, Alan Holdsworth, he used to do that a lot, I've heard. I think
Yeah.
he even did it to me once. I said, man, I think he said, oh, I'm sorry you had to see that, or something, something really out. And I was like, what,
So
yeah.
I've got an Alan Holdsworth story for you.
Oh,
This is
yeah.
from Frank Gambale, and as I said before, before I think we started rolling, I interviewed Frank, and he's one of my guitar heroes. I think I told him that he's like one of my real life guitar heroes or something. I can't remember exactly what I said, but something to that effect. But he was telling me this story about how Alan Holdsworth was opening up for a band that Frank was in. Okay, so
Oh, I think I heard this story. Go ahead.
so basically what happens is so they were touring together. Okay, so every time Alan would come off the stage after playing, he would say something super self-deprecating about how terrible he was and blah blah blah, and he was just kind of down and dark on himself all the time. And so he just kept doing that over and over and over until the band of Frank's band just basically agreed with him and said, yeah, you know what, that wasn't very good, and they were like, wow. It was a game of chicken,
Yeah.
and he got the joke, and then from that point on he stopped being quite so kind of hard on himself, at least on that tour.
That's good.
But
it's called reverse psychology. That's beautiful.
Yep. And it worked, at least in that context. But yeah, and some folks, they have there can be just something actually, and I'm not saying this about Alan, but there's some folks that there could actually be something clinical going on.
Oh no.
Where they just can't get outside of that, and it's just they just have a darkness that is just ever present, and it makes it difficult for them to deal.
Definitely. I mean, another way to see it is also like, only you know how great you can be. I mean, even Coltrane said, when he goes out, 70% comes with him, something like that, and or 75, whatever. And he knows that only if he can play the way he played in his bedroom outside he would be happier, I guess, with that. And I feel the same way. Like, it's sort of like sometimes I play and I'm just playing to a metronome or something, and I'm actually really impressed with myself, which is not really always the case, but I'm like, oh my God, that was burning, or that was just musical on all levels, man. Oh my God. And if I do that often enough, and then I go out and play and it's not there, I'm totally self-deprecating. I'm like, deprecating. I'm just like, man, I suck. It's like, and it might be only 75%, but even that 75% for most people is pretty good. But for me, it's not, because I know the potential and it's not coming out sometimes, and that's another level of, a battle we have to battle within ourselves,
Yeah. I'll tell you, when it came to me that I needed to adjust the way that I was relating to audience members. A great saxophonist, she played in this top 40 cover band I played in, called the Hip Pocket. The Hip Pocket was a Grand Rapids based band, still one of the best bands in Michigan for that. And it was a horn band. It was like a 10 piece horn band. And so there was like, what was it? Barry sax. I was playing tenor. Then there was trumpet and trombone. And we were doing, it was all in-ear monitors, like wireless in-ear monitors, wireless miking. So we're doing like dance moves and stuff while we're playing. We were playing like Tower of Power stuff, nice. And Earth, Wind and Fire, all of that, all of that great music. And so she had done a doctorate. Well, she was ABD, so she didn't complete her dissertation, but she had, so she had, all in performance, saxophone performance. And she realized that she needed to change when people would come up to her at performances and she would say, no, she would try to be, she would always say something like, well, I wasn't satisfied with my playing, like that. I mean, they're saying something that's very positive. She's saying like, well, that wasn't that great. But she actually started to lose respect for the people that were complimenting her. Well, they just obviously don't know what good music is. It got there. And she realized at that point that was way too far. And so then she dialed that back and resolved that. And I remember us having that conversation, and she shared that story with me. And that was a good moment for me. And I was still pretty young when that happened. And so now I do the same thing every single time somebody comes up to me. Doesn't matter how great I feel about it or not. I say thank you. And then as they say whatever positive things, I always say, I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Because if I feel like I'm having a struggle, like I want to be honest, like I don't want to like lie to people. Those are two things I can always say, and it's always going to be true. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Even if I was terrible, I'm glad you enjoyed it. You had a good experience, and thank you. You went out of your way to come up and say something to me. At least I owe you that. Right?
Yeah, totally,
so then the rest of it can just stay in my head.
Well, here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. I mean, to cap this subject, I mean, this, often is the case, and, you've probably had this too, but multiple times I've thought I played like crap, and I listen back to a tape, and I'm like, holy shit, that was pretty damn good.
Yeah.
And sometimes I thought I played great, and it wasn't as great as I thought it was. So it's very strange that I begin to start not trusting my stage perception. When I'm on stage, that's again part of letting go and being non-judgmental, if it's possible. That's maybe take some work, but to go on stage and play, and sometimes this doesn't come out, but you magnify that when you're playing, and then that sticks. At least with me, it sticks in my brain, like, oh, that damn mistake, or that feel that I had on that, and then it bypasses all the good stuff that came up that everybody else heard, and it's an interesting thing. You go listen back to the tape, and it's like, oh man, that was like a blurb for like less than 1 second that stuck, on the music, that actually stuck with me for an hour or whatever it is. It's all psychology, man. It's, I think once you get to a certain level, you let it happen. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, that emotional connection totally clouds your judgment. And I listen to myself all the time because it's been a critical part of improvement, right? Totally. But what I have learned, especially if I either was really high on the performance or really low on the performance, I have to wait a couple weeks before I listen.
Yeah.
Because when I listen back, I still have the same residue. I still have the same blinders on or whatever.
Right.
Still cloudiness to be able to see it for what it is.
Totally.
And yeah.
Especially if you do. I just did a recording, a new record, 2 weeks ago, and I've barely listened to a track. I'm just waiting until to go, and it was good. I mean, I of course in the studio you listen to a little, and I was totally pleased with the few things I heard in the studio, and I remember it being a good session. But I'm not listening to it, man, because I've got that that one solo in my head that I didn't dig, and I knew I didn't dig it, and it's sort of like, just wait until I really need to put this thing out. you know.
Yeah.
Strange.
Something that is so interesting to me is that as different as we are as people, everybody's different than everyone else. Everyone's unique. Everyone's an individual. We sure do deal with the same stuff. It's like in so many ways it's a slight twist on the same sort of kind of experience in things that we deal with. It's just,
totally, yeah. It's really about how one mitigates what they deal with. Like, there are many different tools, and to what level can you sort of temper all that junk, that comes along the path, Oh, it's deep.
It is. Man, this has been a fascinating conversation. I
You.
thoroughly enjoyed this. I hope you have too.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a little late on my part, but I took a little nap earlier, so I feel fine. Hey, with no gigs in the pandemic, hardly, it's like, I mean, I've been on the road a couple times, but there's nothing consistent. I find myself sleeping at 12:30, or 12 or whatever, which is kind of unusual when you're playing gigs. Usually it's more like 2:00, whatever.
You're getting out of shape, man. You're getting out of sleeping shape, or out of like lack of sleep shape. Like you're getting spoiled on all of this early sleep.
It's a little weird, actually. Too much YouTube and too much sleep. It's a strange, and too many snacks. That's the really bad part about it.
So do you have something that you now I just heard you say something about this recording, but do you have anything else that you want to plug?
Well, I mean, the previous recording I did, I had a couple of recordings come out in 2020 that, because of the pandemic, I wasn't able to get out there and hit, and travel too much. But there's one called Django Shift that I took, Django Reinhardt's music, a lot of the stuff that hasn't been heard, in fact, or that hasn't been, is not well known. And I reconfigured a lot of those new arrangements, and with a very modern sound, recorded those. And so that's a fun record. I feel like that got out there a little bit. And then, and that's all acoustic guitar with organ and keyboard and drums. And then I just did a new record, a collective with the sitar player, actually, which is very strange for me, because you would kind of expect that from someone from that part of the world, but I never thought I would actually do a record with a sitar player. Now, the strange thing is, he's a white Jewish guy named Josh and Feinberg, and it's I say that because he's interesting, because he's actually an upright bass player too, and he studied with Paul Bley and a bunch of people. So it's like he's got this crossover kind of mentality, and he's a great sitar player. So I decided to go ahead and do this project with him, and I wrote a bunch of new tunes, and he wrote some things, and it's a quartet, and it's going to be good, man. And once I listen to it.
Yeah, right. Well, I look forward to we'll get to listening to it, man, so you can get it out there, because I want to hear it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it taught me a lot. It's really cool. Yeah.
All right. Well, God bless you, and be safe and be well and all that good stuff. And I can't wait to play with you again. And as I said, I have some plans in the works, not for this year's festival, but not for the 2022, but looking into 2023 and some other things. I'm eager to try to get you on campus sometime soon.
Of course, and I'd love to play with you again, man.
Yeah. All right, man.
All right, Sean. Thank you so much.
Yep. I'll see you later. You have a good one.
All right, bro. You too.